In those times of high peril, what we tend to think of as musty doctrine was to them the high mountain air of sweet forgiveness. They would do anything for these truths. So you look at something like the Heidelberg Catechism, or you look at something like the Westminster Confession of Faith, or you look at what seemed to us to be arcane debates over the presence or the absence of the body of the Lord in the consecrated bread, and you realize that people were being taken to the stake because they wouldn't affirm certain of these doctrines, which meant that the contrary doctrine was precious to them. It was not just, they're not just being stubborn, the contrary doctrine was precious to them. So, let me tell you a story. I want to tell you 4 stories, and these 4 stories will illustrate each one of our characteristics of romance: courage, high endurance, generosity, and warm affection. Courage. The residents of Leiden, a city in Holland, told William the Silent, there are 2 Williams, there's William the Silent and then William of Orange, don't get them mixed up. Bad things will happen on your history test. But William the Silent and William of Orange are both good guys. The residents of Leiden, I need to back up. The empire in Spain was the dominant hegemon of that era. As Ben mentioned in the first talk, they ruled southern Italy, they ruled Spain, they owned Holland. So Holland and other territories as well. So the Spanish owned the Low Countries. They held on to Holland. And because the Protestant Reformation took root in Holland, one thing led to another, and the Spanish decided they were going to crack down on them, and this turned into a war for independence, etc. William the Silent was the leader of the Protestants in Holland, and the Spanish came to besiege the town of Leiden. The inhabitants of Leiden told William the Silent, who wasn't there, he was elsewhere, they told him that they would hold out in a siege against the Spanish for 1 month with bread, and for another month without bread. So they said, we can hold out 1 month with bread, we can hold out for a second month without bread. The siege began at the end of May, and it was ended at the beginning of October. All right? Notice how they calculate. We think we can hang out for 2 months, but it went from May to October. At one point, the Spanish offered favorable terms. Now, one of the things that the Dutch had been really remarkable in their building of the dikes, and Leiden was, by this point, inland, but there was it was inland artificially. So there were a whole complex series of dikes that went out. I think the ocean was like 10 miles away by this point. And so they had this complex series of dikes. And what they wanted to do, what the Protestants wanted to do, was they finally, things got so bad that they decided we're going to breach the dikes and we're going to flood our country so we can sail ships up to the city with relief supplies. That was the idea. So they got the agreement of all the farmers whose land would be flooded, and then they breached the dikes, and the wind was blowing in the wrong direction. All right, the wind was blowing the water out to sea so that it didn't flood to the city. So they breached the dikes. They were holding out. At one point, the Spanish offered favorable terms if they would only surrender the city. All you have to do is surrender the city. We will give you favorable terms. This is the answer they got. You call us eaters of dogs and cats. Very well. So long then, this tears me up. So long then, as in this city you hear a dog bark or a cat meow, you may know that we will not yield. And when all else, rats. Yeah. I was thinking about this earlier. When all else is done, we will eat our left arms and keep our right to fight for our country, our faith, and our God. And last, If we have to die, we will set fire to the city and perish in the flames. So that's where they are. This is terrible. Then relief came to them when the reinforcements breached the dikes and were able to sail up to the city. So they breached the dikes, and then after this agonizing time, the wind shifted, and the sea flooded in, and the ships came and relieved them. Courage. How about high endurance? A young Huguenot woman named Marie Durand, 14 years old, was required to abjure her Huguenot faith. All she had to do was say one word, j'abjure. I repent, I recant. I abjure my Huguenot faith. All she had to do was say one word, j'abjure, and she could go free. Because she would not do it, she was placed in a tower by the sea with 30 other Huguenot women, where she remained for the next 38 years. She and her fellows scratched a different word entirely on the wall of the prison. It was résister, resist. I won't say j'abjure, I will say résister, resist. That is resistance, that's high endurance. Generosity. Another Huguenot woman, I said this is the era of martyrdoms. Probably the great number of martyrdoms were in France and in Holland. Another Huguenot woman was being led to the stake in France. She'd been rich. She was the kind of woman who was rich in good deeds, ministering to the poor, and a crowd of them were following her to the stake, weeping. So she was the lady who was like Dorcas in the New Testament. She was rich in good deeds. One of the beggar women, one of the poor women cried out, "You will never give me alms anymore. You will never give me alms anymore." And the martyr, the woman, and isn't it glorious that we will not know her name until the resurrection, said this. She said, "Yes, once more." And she stooped down, took off her shoes, gave them to the woman, and went to heaven barefoot. Generosity. Warm affection. After the Protestants in France had suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Moncontour, their leader, de Coligny, was being carried away wounded on a litter. It was a terrible defeat. He was being carried away wounded on a litter. A trusted counselor of his, who was also wounded, a man named Lestrange, and was being carried behind de Coligny on a narrow road. When the road widened, Lestrange had his litter bearers carry him up alongside de Coligny. The two men looked at each other without speaking, and then Lestrange looked away, eyes full of tears. But as he looked away, he said, "So is it that God is very sweet." De Coligny said later this brief word was used to restore his courage. So, what does all this mean? It means I shouldn't put that many stories like that all close together.